By the way, I've seen argument. We had a commenter on Saturday arguing that, well, in his opinion, Alec Baldwin meets the due caution and circumspection standard because, and therefore this could not have been manslaughter, involuntary manslaughter, because of the presence of a armorer on set and the fact that the David Hall, the first assistant director, he was the overall manager of safety on the set. And Alec Baldwin knew that David Hall had that responsibility, and Alec Baldwin knew that Hannah Gutierrez was the armorer handling the firearms. And his knowledge of that, and arguably his management of that, Alec Baldwin was a producer on this movie set, meets the requirement of due caution and circumspection. So the first thing I would point out is that even if you believe that's true, and I'll show you why it's not reasonable to believe that's true, even if you believe that's true, that's not the only way to get to involuntary manslaughter, because another way is lawful act, which might produce death in an unlawful manner, not justified, that results in manslaughter. That can apply here on the facts of this case. Or that this was an unlawful act. This was negligent handling of a firearm by Alec Baldwin, and that amounted to manslaughter. But I don't believe that you can credibly argue that the managerial responsibility of safety by David Hall, the first assistant director, or the presence of an armorer, Hannah Gutierrez, satisfies the due caution and circumspection requirement. Because what that would mean is that Alec Baldwin had no further responsibility for the safe handling of that gun, what he knew to be a real gun in his hand. That he had no subsequent responsibility for any negative consequences in his handling of that gun, because David Hall managed safety on set and Hannah Gutierrez was the armorer. But even the movie industry doesn't believe that's true. Now, I've talked previously about how the SAG guidelines for gun safety cannot help Alec Baldwin and can only hurt Alec Baldwin. So what I mean by that is, to the extent that the SAG guidelines would be argued to be more relaxed and forgiving of Alec Baldwin's handling of the firearm, that can't help him in an involuntary manslaughter prosecution in New Mexico, because the SAG guidelines are not New Mexico law. SAG is not a law-making body anywhere, and particularly not New Mexico. New Mexico criminal law is created by its elected legislature, signed by the governor, or by New Mexico case law, appellate court decisions. The Screen Actors Guild does not create New Mexico law. So to the extent that the Screen Actor Guild's guidelines would be more forgiving for Alec Baldwin than New Mexico criminal law, that cannot help Alec Baldwin in a New Mexico criminal prosecution, because SAG guidelines cannot trump New Mexico criminal law. Now, those guidelines can hurt Alec Baldwin if they are perfectly parallel, equal to the requirements of New Mexico criminal law, or they're even stricter than New Mexico criminal law. That could be used to hurt him, because you could argue, not only does New Mexico criminal law say Alec Baldwin's guilty, but his own industry guidelines say he's guilty, that he failed to meet the standard of due care and circumspection. So if anyone's arguing that the presence of David Hall, assistant director, manager, overall manager of safety, and the presence of Hannah Gutierrez, the armorer, that under industry guidelines that would relieve Alec Baldwin of any further responsibility for safe gun handling, well, all you have to do is look at SAG's own guidelines. As an actor, you are ultimately responsible for your own safety and the safety of your fellow crew cast members. It is your right and responsibility to double check the setup to ensure your own safety. So you can't say as an actor that other people are responsible and that relieves you of a safety obligation. Everybody is responsible for safety, including the actor. But it gets worse when we get to the firearm-specific safety guidelines. This is SAG Safety Bulletin, Screen Actors Guild Safety Bulletin number 1, firearms. Does this say that the safety protocols for the handling of firearms ends with the armorer and the first assistant director? Did the Screen Actor Guild's firearm safety bulletin guidelines say, actors, you have no responsibility for how you handle a firearm on set, because that responsibility ends with the first assistant director and the armorer? That meets the standard for safe handling of a firearm. After that, you can do whatever you want as the actor. No, it doesn't say that. Responsibility for safe handling of a firearm continues when the gun is in the actor's hand, after the first assistant director and the armorer have relieved themselves of the gun. How do we know? Because it tells us explicitly. Because there are a ton of safety requirements imposed on the actor after the armorer and assistant director roles are done, imposed on the actor in the safe handling of a firearm. Refrain to the actor. These are all instructions to the actor. Refrain from pointing a firearm at anyone. Did Alec Baldwin do that? Did he point a firearm at someone? He sure pointed it at Helena Hutchins, didn't he? Did that responsibility end with the first assistant director and Hannah Gutierrez, the armorer? No, not according to SAG. Any object at which you point a firearm could be destroyed. Why do they want the actor to be aware of that? Because the actor still has responsibility for how he's handling that real gun. Never place your finger on the trigger until you're ready to shoot. Is that directed at the first assistant director or the armorer? It's the actor's responsibility. He doesn't get to do whatever he wants with his trigger finger just because an armorer and assistant director exist. Never lay down a firearm or leave it unattended. Again, this is a requirement for the actor. He's not relieved of this because the set has a first assistant director and an armorer. Even SAG continues to impose safety standards on the actor, despite the presence of an armorer and first assistant director who's general manager of overall safety. So no, if you're arguing that the presence of the armorer and the first assistant director relieves the actor of further responsibility, that satisfies the due care and circumspection requirement under New Mexico involuntary manslaughter law, I'd have to say you simply don't have a leg to stand on. Not just under New Mexico law, but under SAG industry guidelines itself.